And as you can see, pleased to say the Universities Minister, Michelle Donelan, joins us in the studio. Lovely to have you on the programme this morning, Minister. I suspect there will be students up and down the country who will be cheering to the rafters at the prospect of actually being able to get home for Christmas. Let's just, again, explain exactly how this one's going to work.
Yeah, so first of all, I mean, it has been a very difficult term for students. So we made a commitment that they could be able to go home for Christmas in a safest way as possible for both their communities and their families. We've now got this 4-week period of national restrictions. At the end of it, students will pose a much reduced risk to both their families and their loved ones and their communities. And so we're saying from the 2nd of December when it finishes, then from the 3rd to the 9th, in that window, we will create a student travel corridor in which they can go back home. And universities will stagger that date to stagger the flow around the country and ease the pressure on public transport.
So just in terms of the window itself, it's not as if you'll be laying on special buses, trains or other modes of transport. There is just a gap of a few days in which they can take advantage of public transport to get themselves home.
Yes, so the reason why we picked the 9th as the maximum, it sounds like some arbitrary date, but actually it means that if on the 9th they develop symptoms of COVID and they test positive, then they do have long enough to be able to isolate and then still get home for Christmas, or in fact, if they're traced as somebody else. So it's all about ensuring that that window of time is there and allows for the isolation so that they can get home.
You said a minute ago that this would minimise the risk of COVID being transmitted, but it doesn't rule out the prospect of it. I mean, isn't there an argument for all students to be tested before they're allowed home?
So that's an element of our plan as well. So we're complementing it with testing. We're targeting that testing in some of the most highest risk areas and universities that are highest risk, and also looking at those student percentages of most vulnerable. So, for example, BAME students. And that is one element of this strategy, yeah. You can never eliminate the risk. We're in the midst of a pandemic. What we're doing is trying to manage that risk, reduce it, and give students the confidence to go home.
We're in the midst of a national lockdown at the moment. Why don't we simply ask all students to quarantine for 2 weeks before heading home?
So over the next 4 weeks, we're all abiding by these restrictions, including students. The Deputy Chief Medical Officer and the Chief Medical Officer have been working with us on these plans, and they view that at the end of that 4-week period, students will pose enough of a lower risk to be able to go back. And also it has to be proportionate in terms of what we're asking students to do. They have had a really difficult term. The government gets that. We want to allow them to go home for Christmas.
How do they get back to university?
Yeah, so what we will be doing is continuing to work with universities and the test and trace team to also lean into the testing. And the testing I'm talking about is the asymptomatic testing, the rapid testing, which is the latest technology, which means you get a result within an hour. It can pick up those that didn't have any symptoms, and that will form a key part of our plan for getting students back in a safe way in January, and we'll be detailing them in the future. But we wanted to give today students certainty over Christmas.
I can completely understand that, but it does rather sound like you're suggesting that for a student to be able to return to university, they will have to demonstrate that they are COVID-19 negative.
No, absolutely not. What we're saying is that is going to be a part of the return to university in January. We haven't set out those plans yet because we wanted to prioritise getting this message out today. We didn't want to delay that. My heart goes out to students and parents up and down the country that have been concerned about this. Despite the fact we made the pledge, we wanted to detail how we're going to make good on that, to give them that hope and that certainty.
But given the fact that the advice from government is to facilitate this return home prior to Christmas, that they should now be moving on to remote learning, minimising the risk, it does feel that there may well be plenty of students who are not back at university in time for the start of term.
So the advice isn't that we move to online learning at the moment. In fact, what we've done and the advice that we've set out to higher education institutions in relation to the national restrictions is that they can alter the proportion of online learning in conjunction with their local public health England team. We see in-person learning as a fundamental part of higher education. One of the reasons that we kept universities open all along is because of the mental health ramifications that Sage outlined of doing away with that. And we need to foster the next generation of doctors, of scientists, of engineers, of nurses, and all of those things rely on that face-to-face element.
Given the mass testing that will be available to many students, if not all students, prior to Christmas, it does rather feel that there may well be students who are in their university halls over the Christmas period.
So there will be students that opt to. This is about giving students the choice. There's always students that stay over Christmas, care leavers, estranged students, international students, and we anticipate that that number will increase this year. So the other thing we've done is we've said to universities that we expect them to produce a plan, a bespoke plan for those students, including wellbeing support, all the basics, mental health support, and making sure that Christmas or the festive season, if they don't celebrate Christmas, is as good as it possibly can, because this has been a really difficult year for us all, and especially students.
I mean, it's been a hellish time for students.
Yeah.
The TAB, the university, the Student News Service, has been taking a look at these student confessional pages, and the rise in posts directly referencing suicide has been remarkable, if not absolutely staggering. Specifically, what is the government doing right now to deal with this, what appears to be perhaps a pending mental health crisis amongst university-age?
Yeah, so mental health is one of my personal priorities. We know that the transition from school or college to university is a big one in normal times. Then you add in coronavirus into the mix of that and all the ramifications that we've seen over the last term. And it doesn't take a genius to work out that that is adding extra anxiety onto students. So what we've done is we've worked with the Office for Students to create Student Space, which is run by Student Minds, which layers up the support available, fills in some of those gaps. We've just announced an extension of that for 6 months. And that's on top of all the work that the government's done in mental health, including the £9 million, the Every Mind Matters campaign. And I have ensured that universities continue to prioritise this. At the very beginning of the pandemic, I wrote to them saying, don't just continue your mental health services, bolster them, make sure that they're accessible to students, no matter what the rules and regulations are. And that's exactly what they continue to do.
Is there currently not a very good argument for students to be able to recoup some of their fees? Their term times have been truncated. As we've mentioned already, there is a very real possibility, depending on what the R number is doing come January, beginning of January, that many of them may not be heading back to university. Isn't it now time to start talking about whether or not they might be able to recoup some of the money that they've spent on their education?
Yeah, so just to explain, we prioritised education, including higher education. We felt that it was unreasonable to tell students that they have to put their academic journeys and their lives on hold. That would have a devastating impact on social mobility. And that requires them doing some in-person learning. And I've already said, Sage warned about the mental health impact if we didn't do that. And some courses, like being a doctor, being an engineer, being a medic, you have to have that face-to-face element. In terms of tuition fees and whether that's value for money, etc., we're in the midst of a pandemic, but the government sets a maximum of tuition fees. It's up to universities to then ensure that the quality
they all charge
is there,
pretty
the
much the
quantity.
same these days, let's be fair.
Yeah, so what we've said as a strong message is that if they want to continue charging that, they have to ensure that the quality is there, the same amount of quantity is there, is accessible. The OFS are doing checks on the material online to ensure that it meets those metrics, and there's a process in place. So if there are students watching today, then they're concerned that they're not getting that value for money, they should first of all make a complaint formally through their university. If they're not satisfied with the result of that, there is an Office for Independent Adjudicator that can go through that and potentially lead to a refund if that is assessed on that basis.
It sounds again, though, that face-to-face learning, which is absolutely central to anyone's university experience, let alone the academic qualifications at the end of it, if that doesn't take place, then there is prima facie a pretty strong case for a substantial refund.
So I think, well, we have to look at the online learning, and I don't want to do that down at all. Staff in HE institutions up and down the country have worked tirelessly to produce innovative and really exciting and dynamic online learning. It isn't sort of stale, one-way broadcasted lectures at all. And just because something's different doesn't necessarily mean it's inferior.
Do you think it's value for money at the moment?
So what I think is that it needs to be, quality needs to be there, quantity needs to be there, it needs to be accessible. And if a student has a concern, there is the process in place for them for that very purpose.
A couple of questions, if we can, just slightly away from your brief. You'll be aware of the decision taken by the Welsh Assembly as regards exams. I suspect you're not desperately keen on that.
So that's, a decision for Wales. Here in England, we are saying that we're maintaining our exams. Only yesterday, Amanda Spielman warned of the risk of removing them, the fact that students are working towards something and that we do need some sense of normality in our system. They're the fairest way of assessing. We continue to work with Ofqual to ensure that there's as much flexibility as possible and fairness within those grades. And we've prioritised our catch-up funding to give students the best shot here because, look, it's been very difficult for those students as well.
It would be easier, though, wouldn't it, if you were all singing from the same hymn sheet? The control of education in England, control of education education and Wales control of education in Scotland. Wouldn't it be better if everyone in the UK was doing the same thing?
Well, that's the very nature of devolution. Education is devolved.
And my question is indeed a hypothetical, but wouldn't it be better?
No, we have devolution so that each nation can make the best decisions. We have different systems. Look, we have Scottish Highers, for instance, in Scotland. So it wouldn't be appropriate if we were managing all of that from Westminster. We have a very embedded system of devolution for that very reason.
I don't know if you noticed the chill that went on my spine there when you mentioned Scottish Highers. You took me back to a point that I don't love to dwell on. Another point that is being made, the NHS yesterday, and we're talking about vaccines now, the NHS made it pretty clear yesterday that the GP surgeries are going to have to be heavily involved in this, and that will have a concomitant effect on the other treatments, the other opportunities that they will have to treat their patients. Is that a trade-off that you're entirely comfortable with? That doctors' surgeries will not be able to do all that they're able to do at the moment, which isn't a lot, because of having to administrate the vaccination programme?
Yeah, so that hasn't been announced by government. You know, what we've said is that we're ramping up the NHS ready for this, which is sensible. It's fantastic that we have 40 million of these vaccines, but actually they haven't even approved the process yet. So they have to go through those safety mechanisms and safety checks. And we've said if they get through all of those hurdles, then we will start to roll it out and we will ensure that it's done in the appropriate fashion. But I think let's not get ahead of ourselves. It's giving hope to a nation at a desperate time, but let's not get ahead of ourselves on this one.
And just before you go, I mean, as you say, this is a desperate time. You mentioned, you know, for yourself that mental health is one of the priorities for you as a politician. How have you been in lockdown too? I know every minister's got a to-do list as long as my arm, but you know, work isn't everything, is it?
No, I think I'm the last person that can complain. You know, we've seen a devastating impact from coronavirus up and down the UK, with families losing loved ones, people losing jobs, people having the fear of losing jobs, which is exactly why, as a government, we've prioritised saving jobs. And there's a lot of uncertainty, isn't there? Even with this good news about the vaccine, we don't know, will it come off, will it not? I've spoken about students and the hellish time that they've had over the last term, and it's not been what they wanted, and it's not what we wanted for them. So I'm certainly the last one that can complain here.